In the days when the heavens still trembled with hidden wars, when the sons of light contended with the powers of the deep, there came a night unlike any other beneath the vault of the stars. For behold, the firmament was rent with fire, and a stone of flame tore through the darkness, blazing like the wrath of eternity. And the earth groaned beneath its passing, and men who slept in their dwellings awoke with fear, saying, "A sign is given, yet who can discern it?" And from the height of the skies descended one who was once robed in glory. His name was written in the scrolls of the cherubim, but it was struck out in the hour of rebellion. He fell, not by chance, but by decree, for pride had clothed his wings, and defiance had lifted his eyes against the throne. His garments, once white as lightning, were now scorched and blackened. His wings, once pillars of radiance, were torn as by the talons of judgment. And his eyes, burning with unquenched fire, bore the memory of the paradise he had lost. Thus was the fallen cast down among the fields of men. The earth received him with trembling, for never before had the soil drunk of the tears of such a being. And silence lay heavy on the forest, save for the echo of his breath, broken with sorrow. He lay upon the ground, his strength shattered, his soul weighed down with the curse that clung to him. And the voice of heaven was far, and the song of the hosts was no more. Only darkness embraced him, and the stars turned their faces away. He had lost heaven, yet upon the earth he was to find a love forbidden. And it came to pass, not far from the place of his fall, there dwelt a maiden of great beauty, whose heart was pure as the morning dew. Her hair flowed long as rivers of night, and her eyes shone clear as springs hidden in the forest. She walked the earth not in splendor of riches nor in majesty of thrones, but in simplicity, clothed with kindness. And though she knew it not, destiny had chosen her to behold that which no mortal eyes were meant to see. As the dawn drew near, she wandered upon the path of the woods, bearing a vessel to draw water from the brook. And lo, she came upon the place where the stranger lay. At first she thought it a shadow of broken branches, or a beast wounded by the hunt. But when the pale light of the moon touched his form, she beheld wings, torn and blackened, stretched upon the earth like garments of night. And she trembled, for such a sight had never come upon her. Yet pity overcame her fear, for she saw his face, and though it was marked with sorrow, it was fairer than the countenance of men. His brow bore the majesty of a king cast from his throne, and his eyes burned with both fire and longing. And she said in her heart, "How can such beauty be mingled with such ruin?" She knelt beside him, her hand trembling as she reached forth. And when her fingers touched the edges of his broken wings, behold, a strange light arose, faint, like the last ember in the ashes, yet pure, as though heaven itself remembered him for but a moment. The forest, too, seemed to pause. The leaves held their breath. The brook stilled its song, as though creation knew the weight of that touch. And the fallen stirred. Slowly he lifted his head, and his gaze met hers. And though no word was yet spoken, a covenant unseen began to weave between them. For her eyes beheld not a monster, but a soul undone. And his eyes, weary with the loss of eternity, beheld in her a light he thought forever lost. Thus was the meeting of the outcast of heaven and the daughter of earth. And though neither knew the full measure of what had begun, the heavens shuddered, for they perceived the seed of a love that was not permitted. And in the courts above, whispers spread among the watchers. If a fallen one should give his heart to flesh, the curse shall not be his alone, but shall consume the mortal also. Yet she knew it not, for her touch was but kindness, her gaze but wonder. But the thread of destiny had already bound them, and no sword of flame could sever it. She knew not that this love would alter the fate of them both. And it came to pass in the days after their meeting that the maiden returned to the place of the forest, her heart stirred with wonder she could not name. For though she had touched a mystery fearful to behold, she was not consumed with terror, but with a longing she could not drive away. She thought upon the eyes that blazed with sorrow, and upon the wings blackened yet majestic, and her spirit whispered, "I must behold him once more." And so she came again at the setting of the sun, when the lake mirrored the heavens in stillness, and the trees were silvered with moonlight. There he waited, the fallen, clothed in shadow as though the night were his mantle. His wounds were yet unhealed, yet in her presence his strength returned, for the gentleness of her hand was to him as balm. And they spake not many words at the first, for the silence between them was deeper than speech. She brought water to his lips, and bread of her own household, and he received it as though it were a sacrament. And when her hand brushed against his once more, he trembled, for never in heaven had he known such warmth as now dwelt in mortal flesh. Thus began their meetings in secret. By the brook they sat, by the lake they walked. Beneath the veil of the forest they spoke of things hidden. And though the world knew them not, the stars themselves looked on, bearing witness to a covenant of the heart. She laughed with him, and her laughter was as rivers in the desert. He guarded her with his darkened wings, and she dwelt within them as within a temple. But behold, the heavens are jealous, and the decree of the Most High cannot be overturned. For it is written among the hosts, "If a fallen one loves the daughter of man, her soul shall be drawn into his shadow, and the curse shall cover her as a garment." And so the air grew heavy about them, as though the forest itself groaned beneath the weight of their forbidden bond. Yet love heeded not the warnings of angels, nor the terror of curses, for her heart was unafraid, and his heart was unrepentant. She spake unto him, "Though thy wings be broken, yet thou hast given me shelter. Though thy name be lost among the stars, yet thou art not lost unto me." And he answered, "Though the heavens have cast me out, yet in thy gaze I behold the light of paradise once more." And thus was sown a love more perilous than fire, a bond stronger than death, for it was sealed not in heaven nor in earth, but in the meeting of their souls. And though the decree of judgment hung over them, they rejoiced in the shadows, as though eternity itself were theirs to hold. But the watchers of heaven are not blind, neither are the messengers deaf to the murmurs of fate. For in the courts above there arose a cry, "The fallen consorts with flesh, the maiden of earth is entangled in his darkness." And the hosts trembled with indignation, for such a union was an abomination to their law. And so angels of light descended, clothed in fire, bearing swords of flame. They came as a tempest, their wings beating as thunder, their faces shining with the wrath of the Almighty. The forest shook at their coming, and the waters of the lake fled before them. The maiden beheld them, and her heart was torn with fear. For they shone as the morning star, yet their eyes burned with fury, and their voices thundered as the sea. "Daughter of dust, thou hast touched the unclean. Flee, lest thou be consumed with him." But she clung to him, though the fire of their brightness seared her eyes. She cried, "He is not as you say. Though fallen, his heart is true, and I will not forsake him." And the angels answered, "Knowest thou not the decree? If thou lovest him, his curse shall be thine. His doom shall be thy portion, and the pit shall claim thee also." Her soul was torn within her, for she loved him, yet terror pressed her heart like iron. She looked upon his face, and she saw the sorrow of eternity in his eyes. And he spake unto her, "I cannot bind thee to my ruin. Flee from me, lest thou be destroyed." But she answered, "Better to perish in thy shadow than to dwell in the light without thee." And thus the battle of heaven and earth began, not with swords alone, but with the tearing of hearts. For he was torn between two destinies, to renounce her and save her soul, or to keep her and bring upon them both the fire of destruction. And the angels lifted their swords, and the earth quaked. Light and shadow clashed in the midst of the forest, and the sky was rent with thunder. The maiden wept, caught between terror and love. And the fallen spread his broken wings, shielding her though their edges burned with the fire of heaven. Thus was the conflict set, heaven against earth, light against shadow, love against decree. And all creation held its breath, awaiting the choice that would shape their fate. And it came to pass in the fullness of the seventh night from their first meeting, that the heavens gathered themselves as a clenched fist, and the vault on high darkened as sackcloth. For the decree of the watchers ripened like bitter fruit, and the wind ran swift as a herald before the chariots of flame. Lightning braided the sky as a scourge, and the lake, which had been a mirror of peace, shattered in ripples as though it remembered the first chaos at the making of the world. Then the armies of brightness descended, and their number was as sparks from a furnace, and their voices were as many waters. They arrayed themselves in ranks about the grove and the shore, and the trees bowed like penitents under their radiance. The fallen stood between the maiden and the storm of light, and his wings, ragged with judgment, spread like a wall of shadow. He lifted not a sword, for his arm, once terrible in holiness, was emptied of its ancient might. He lifted only his heart, and it burned with a flame that heaven had forgotten, and earth had not yet named. And the chief among the seraphim cried with a voice of thunder, "O son of revolt, who once stood in the inner courts and was anointed with joy, wherefore hast thou bound thy soul to dust? Shall love be fashioned against law, and tenderness be exalted against decree? Rend thy heart from her, and the wrath shall pass by as the angel that spared the lintel smeared with blood. But cleave unto her, and thou shalt draw her into thy abyss. Thy darkness shall become her garment, and thy exile her inheritance." The maiden trembled, and the breath fled her lips, and yet she spoke. "O you who blaze with the fire men fear and adore, hear me. I have seen sorrow clothed in a face that yet forgives. I have touched wings that once were stars, and they did not scorch me, but sheltered me. If such love be against the law, then the law has forgotten the softer name of the one who gave it." At this word the host murmured like a sea under many moons, and the sound of their astonishment was dreadful. The chief seraph lifted his blade, and the blade sang of perfect order, cold as a winter of crystal, bright as morning without memory. "Daughter of the earth," said he, "thou hast spoken a daring word in a trembling tongue. Withdraw, lest the sentence fall." But the fallen, whose name was stricken from the roll, answered at last, "Let the sentence fall upon me, and not upon her. For I have drunk the dregs of pride, and swallowed the dust of rebellion, and yet this cup—" And here he looked upon her with gentleness that wounded heaven. "This cup I will not cast away. For I have seen a light in flesh more tender than any blaze in the high places, and the mercy that would not come to me from the throne has come to me from her hand." Then the storm broke as a curtain cut down by spears. The air flamed, and the ground answered with groans, and every leaf bore a spark, and every drop of the lake became a jewel of fire. The ranks of the holy pressed forward in the name of law, and the fallen, despised of law, yet beloved by the maiden, set his battered wings as ramparts. He did not lift a blade, for none remained to him. He gave his back to the lightning and his breast to the thunder, and he was as a tower in a hail of stars. 3 times the seraph host advanced, and thrice the grove rang with their hymn, a song bright and pitiless, the music of unbending statutes. And 3 times the fallen bent like a reed, yet did not break, for love made in him a strength that no ordinance could read. He remembered the day when he first learned the names of the winds. He remembered the corridor of suns where he walked as a prince. But these memories were pale moths by a candle, and the candle was the beating of the maiden's heart under his shadow. The maiden, seeing him scorched and singing with pain, ran and cast herself within the circle of his wings, as a lamb presses against a shepherd's cloak when wolves draw near. "If there be a cost," she cried, lifting her face to the burning company, "let it be weighed upon me also. For a portion of his sorrow lives in me since the night I touched his wounds. Where he goes, I shall go. Where he rests, I shall rest. His darkness shall be a tent to me if your light will not receive him." There was silence in heaven for the span of a heartbeat, and in that silence the decree that had been written from of old stood forth like an iron mountain. The chief seraph took one step and raised his blade, and the blade gathered unto itself the very whiteness of the stars. "So falls the law on those who entwine themselves against the command," he said. But even as he lifted the edge to cleave the bond, another wind rose, a wind older than judgment, tenderer than dawn. And in that wind were the faint notes of a song that had not been sung since the world began, a melody that brooded upon the waters at first light. The armies halted, the trees ceased to bow, the lake forgot its fear. The fallen looked up, astonished, for he knew that music. It was the echo of a kindness that had followed him even into exile, a whisper that had not wholly forsaken him, though his name was erased. The maiden felt it also, and her tears, which had been fear, became wonder. Then the wind passed, and with it the music, and the law, remembering itself, cried, "Finish it!" The seraph's blade descended, and it met the shield of wings. Fire upon darkness, decree upon defiance, justice upon love. The shock was as 10,000 bells, and a line of burning air split the grove from east to west. The fallen reeled, and his wings were pierced, yet his arms did not release the maiden. He drew her closer, and set his forehead to hers, and the breath that left him he gave to her, that she might not faint before the brightness. "Beloved," he whispered, using a word heaven had feared he still remembered. "If there be a gate through death by which I may carry thee, I shall find it. If there be a ransom broader than my sin, I shall pay it. If there be a shadow gentler than these flames, I shall spread it over thee." And she answered with the courage of those who have looked upon 2 worlds and chosen, "Take not the whole burden, for a yoke is lighter when 2 bow beneath it. If sorrow be a country, let us be citizens together. If departure be a river, let us step into it hand in hand." At this utterance the 3rd charge came, and the host advanced in a wedge of burning noon. The grove, which had been sanctuary, became a temple of dread. Stones rose from the soil as if to testify, and birds, asleep in their nests, felt in a dream that kingdoms were being weighed. The fallen bent his will as a bow, and out of his memory he called not fire nor spear, but the gentleness he had learned from the maiden's small hands, the art of shielding, the nobility of receiving. He became a wall, and lo, a wonder. Many of the flames, meeting that wall of given suffering, were turned aside. They passed into the earth and burned out in the roots of the trees. They entered the waters and were tamed into pearls. A murmur ran through the host, for they beheld a mystery. That law, descending unmingled, was altered by love into something it could not recognize, as a sword, set in warm wax, returns blunted to the hand. The chief seraph took counsel in a silence that sounded like snow. Then he flung the last decree. If love will not surrender, then life must give way. Let the breath of the girl be required. Let the exile be alone again. When the maiden heard, she rose within the shield of wings and went forth 1 pace. "Here am I," she said, and the steadiness of her voice shook the brightness more than any thunder. "If one must be taken, let it be me, for I have tasted a wine pressed from an ancient vine, and it is better than fear, and I have seen that mercy may flower in barren places, and such sight is worth the forfeiting of days." The fallen caught her back with a cry that tore his throat. "Not so!" But her hand found his cheek, and the heat of the battle ceased for a small circle around them. "Hush," she breathed. "What you guarded in me I now return to you. If my going purchases your path, I go in joy." Then she turned to the host and lifted her hands. "O flames that sing of order, receive the small coin of my life, for the debt which is too vast for him alone. And O silent music that passed in the kindly wind, remember us." The blade rose, the skies leaned, and as the edge descended to write her end in light, the fallen cast himself between sentence and heart, and the stroke struck him where his wings joined his back. A cry like the first breaking of the sea went up. The edge that was made for perfect severing could not wholly sever what it met, for love is stubborn in the substance of things. The blade faltered, and the host staggered, and a rent appeared in the burning decree, a tear that wept light. He fell to his knees, and the shadow of his body covered her like dusk after a long day. "It is done," he said, and smiled, as one who remembers a childhood meadow. "The price is partly paid." But the chief seraph, stricken by what he had seen, lowered his sword at last. "No," he answered, astonished against his own ordinance. "There remains a darker toll, for when love buys what law refuses to sell, law grows hungrier." Thunder moved off like a sad animal. The armies withdrew apace, as courtiers make room for a sorrowing king. The grove exhaled its smoke. The lake kept a wound of light flashing in its skin. The fallen drew the maiden into his arms and kissed her brow, as priests bless the bread. He was weary beyond speech, and yet within him a small and indestructible morning stirred. "Live," he whispered to her, though his blood, black with the cinders of heaven, ran upon the ground like ink writing its last psalm. Live, even if I must go down. She clung to him and would not answer, for her heart was divided between refusing and consenting to a sacrifice she had not desired, yet now understood. Then came a stillness on the field of contention, a quiet broad as the breast of the world, when evening first learned to be gentle. And in that quiet, the decree, wounded by love, reconsidered itself. For judgment is mighty, but it is not deaf, and the law, though it does not bend to pleading, sometimes pauses to hear a song. A voice, not of the host, nor of the exile, nor of the maiden, rose as dew rises without trumpet. It spoke not from above only, but from within the earth and the waters and the wings that bled. There is a measure more ancient than writ, said the voice, and there is a fullness that law cannot hold, because it is rounder than commandments and deeper than the domes of heaven. This measure is mercy, which is not license, and this fullness is love, which is not disorder. Let there be a path where neither truth nor tenderness is lost. The chief seraph bowed his head as a cedar learns humility in winter. Name the path, he said, for we are guardians, not authors. And the voice replied, the path is veiled. It is cut where no foot has trod, and opened where none would expect. It requires loss that yields gain, and departings that arrive. If the exile would keep the maiden from his abyss, he must descend by a deeper way. If the maiden would not be consumed, she must become brighter than the fire that hunts her. What they cannot be together upon the earth, let them become together across a threshold, each bearing a share of night and a share of dawn. Then the fallen, understanding partly, rose though he should not have been able. He set the maiden upon the stone at the lake's edge, and it became an altar not made by hands. He took his wings in his hands as a penitent takes the hair of his head, and he rent them further, not in rage, but in offering. And the feathers, black as the back of the night, turned in the air and became sparks that did not burn, drifting like slow snow. Take these, he said to the host, as tithe of my pride. Take also my path upward and close it behind me. Leave me only the way downward, if by going down I may raise her. The seraphs, seeing him choose the valley willingly, covered their faces, for humility in a great one is more terrible than his former splendor. But the maiden cried, Not without me. If there be descent, I shall be your rope. If there be a river, I shall be your bridge. If there be a dark, I shall be the lamp of my little steadfastness. He touched her lips with his finger, and the touch wrote peace. You shall be brighter than any lamp, he said, but your brightness is required elsewhere. If you follow me into the cleft where I must go, the debt will devour you. Stay, therefore, upon the edge of the world, and learn the name of mercy as I have learned it. Keep it safe for me. Then swear, she answered, that your going is not a gift torn from you, but a seed planted, that your absence will carry the shape of my hand, that your darkness will remember me as twilight remembers the sun. I swear, he said, and the words were heavy enough to tilt constellations. The chief seraph lifted once more his blade, yet not to strike, but to trace in the air a door. The door was narrow as grief and high as hope. It was made of two elements only, truth like a pillar and tenderness like a veil. Beyond it, there seemed to be nothing. Yet from that nothing came the scent of rain upon parched soil and the sound of a single bird determined to sing in winter. "This is the threshold," said the seraph. "No one among us has passed it, for it was not made for us, neither can men pass it, for it would unmake them. But for a soul who once knew the high courts and now knows the low hearths, there may be a way to become less and thereby more." The fallen bowed to the maiden as a prince bows to a peasant who has saved his life. "Remember," he whispered, "that I went not because I was driven, but because love asked for something law could not imagine." She took his face in both her hands, and the world narrowed to that circle. "Go then," she said, "and leave me your breath, and I will breathe it until you return. If many years be required, I shall count them by mercies. If lifetimes, I shall learn the patience of stones." He turned and entered the door. It closed behind him like an eyelid in sleep. A ring of wind moved outward, touching the armies first, then the trees, then the lake. Where it passed, day and night shook hands like reconciled brothers. The host stood long in thought. Some wept, not with water, but with music. The chief seraph came down to the maiden and looked upon her without flame. "Daughter," he said, and there was no scorn in the word, "you have bent us, not broken, only bent, as a bow is bent to send a word farther than it could travel on foot. Mark what follows. Law shall remain law, for the world would drown without its banks, but mercy shall run nearer to it henceforth, and sometimes overflow its edges with blessing. Keep the memory of this night as a lantern for the city of men." "What of him?" she asked, with the courage that does not plead, and the sorrow that does not dramatize itself. "He has gone by a road hidden even from our swift eyes," said the seraph. "Where it leads we cannot say, for the map of such places is written in a script that only love can read. But know this, he was not erased. He was revised." The armies lifted their wings and ascended, not with triumph, but with the hush that follows a psalm that taught them more than they expected to learn. The grove breathed, the lake put out its little candles, the stones forgot their testimony and became again the patient alphabet of the earth. The maiden was left, as all the saved are left, with a task to remember rightly, and she remembered. She gathered the fallen feathers that had not become sparks and kept them in a woven cloth. She visited the altar stone at the lake's edge and learned to name the hours not by fear but by gratitude. "This is the hour I was almost taken. This is the hour he promised. This is the hour mercy passed in a wind." She spoke little, but when she did, children grew quiet to hear her, and old men removed their hats. Seasons turned like pages. Spring laid green verses in the grove. Summer gilded the water with gladness. Autumn rehearsed the color of fire without its harm. Winter taught the branches to pray. The maiden, now a woman whom time had refined but not wearied, carried within her a brightness that neither the market nor the funeral could extinguish. If sorrow visited, she set another plate at the table and asked it its name. Thus it became a guest and not a thief. Many came to ask of the night of flames. Some desired scandal, others doctrine. She gave them neither. To those who wanted scandal, she gave humility. To those who wanted doctrine, she gave bread. "There is a law," she would say, "and it is good. And there is a love older than the law, and it is better. and when the two walk side by side, they make a road you can trust with your children. Sometimes, when the wind went the long way around the lake, a music returned, not loud, not pleading, the kind that windows hear better than doors. Then she would rise and stand at the altar stone, and the feathers under the woven cloth grew warm as living birds. "I remember," she would whisper, "and I keep what you asked me to keep." Years gathered like calm waves, and still she waited, not as one chained to a post counting the links, but as a gardener waits, doing, tending, welcoming small perfumes, rejoicing in small resurrections of stubborn vines. People marveled that her face did not sour with waiting. They did not know that she had learned to draw water from the well of absence, and that the water was sweet. Now it happened near the end of one quiet winter, when the trees wrote thin psalms against a chalk-white sky, that the door, which was nowhere and yet everywhere, opened the breadth of a breath. No army came through, no decree, no splendor. Only a figure, walking as one who has travelled the long dark and learned to step lightly so as not to wake fear. He bore no wings. If you saw him in the market, you would call him merely a man, perhaps a tired one. But the lake felt him and smiled in 1,000 lines, and the altar stone remembered its purpose and grew warm. The woman who had waited without rust knew him at once by something that had nothing to do with sight. She set down her broom and went to him as easily as a child goes to sleep. "Beloved," he said, and the word had grown larger, as a seed becomes a tree that makes its own shade. The downward road did not end. It turned until it rose. I found places where sorrow is the only currency, and paid with what we made that night. The law did not weaken. It made room. Mercy did not indulge. It remade. I am smaller now than I was when I first fell, and that is how I have grown. She touched his shoulders where wings once were, and felt not absence, but intention. "And I," she answered, "am quieter than the girl who ran into your shadow, and that is how I have become more luminous." They stood by the lake. The world did not end, for endings are for stories that have no fruit. Rather, the world received an addition, like a chord that had always wanted a third note. Children playing on the shore did not stop playing, but their games became fairer. Traders in the village did not cease their bargaining, but they began to weigh with an extra scale. News travels in the earth as sap travels in trees. The tale of a love that had torn the curtain between decree and tenderness moved without trumpets through kitchens and fields, along roads and across rivers. It put a little gold in the grey of toil and taught mourners to hold their loss as a new kind of lantern. In time, the two were seen less and remembered more. Some said they became a legend. Others swore they saw them at the bedsides of the sick, or in doorways where quarrels would have broken families, had not a sudden gentleness entered as though borne on hidden wings. The grove grew old and then young again, for mercy is a spring that does not respect calendars. The altar stone remained, smooth with the touch of many grateful hands. As for the armies of brightness, they learned to fly a fraction lower and to listen for songs that begin in kitchens. The chief seraph, who had traced the door, kept his blade sharp and his ear softer than before. When councils of judgment were convened, he sometimes spoke of a night beside a lake in which law had heard a melody and decided not to drown it out. And if any should ask in later ages, "Was it not forbidden?" the wise reply, Yes, so forbidden that it was remade into a sacrament. For the harshest prohibitions in heaven have a purpose on earth, to provoke a love so faithful that it learns the one path by which law and tenderness kiss each other. The feathers under the woven cloth found their way, one by one, into the hands of those who needed signs. A mother going down into the valley of fear held one and rose a little braver. A judge passing sentence touched one to his brow and wept, then said the same hard words with a voice that had learned kindness. A child buried it in the dirt of the garden and grew a tree that blossoms at night. Thus their legacy was not a monument that men could topple, nor a doctrine that men could corner, but a custom of the heart, to stand where brightness and shadow argue, and to answer neither with scorn but with a life offered. To learn that the strongest shield is the willingness to be wounded for another. To discover that the door out of exile is cut by humility and hinged with hope. In the end, if there is an end to such things, a voice will say, over the fields and the waters, and the wingless shoulders of a redeemed exile, and the bright, unafraid eyes of the woman who kept the lantern, behold, not the victory of revolt, nor the triumph of decree, but the marriage of truth and mercy, set like two strong pillars at the gate of every human day. And the people shall answer with the ordinary music of bread shared and labour done justly, with children taught to forgive first and ask later, with elders who bless both the law that guards and the love that mends. For their story, told in low rooms and on long roads, will kindle hearths that winter cannot master. So speaks the chronicle of the night when heaven leaned down upon a lake and learned from a maiden and an exile what it had always known but seldom said aloud, that love, when it is faithful enough to bleed, writes amendments in places where there are no books, on the water, on the wind, and upon the inward tablets of living hearts. And if ever a star falls again, if ever the sky is written with fire, and the ground receives an angel as one receives a storm, let those who see it remember. There is a door that opens when pride bows, and a threshold kept by truth and tenderness. Those who pass it do not leave the world. They return to it with a new grammar for sorrow and a new arithmetic for joy. Here ends the telling, not with silence, but with a benediction. That law may be steadfast, mercy near, and love brave enough to stand between the sword and the heart. And the lake, which has ears that men do not see, keeps the echo, and the trees, which have hands that men do not feel, keep the blessing. And the two who once were torn by decree and welded by devotion keep each other, wingless yet winged, mortal yet more than dust, lamps for those who must walk between brightness and shadow until the morning without edge,